So it's my pleasure to welcome you all to a sort of a two-for-one event today. We have the Cyber GIS Distinguished Lecture Series that is coinciding also with the NCSA Colloquium Series. And as you know, we're trying to establish an environment where we have an important colloquium event every week, and we have a great speaker today to give us another in the series. And we also have a very strong group in Cyber GIS that's not only here at NCSA, but I think making links to many groups across the campus, in fact, at a national and international level as well, and that's led by Xiaowen Wang here, and so I'll introduce Xiaowen in just a minute. But for me, that's a nice example of where we're trying to move NCSA going forward, to build up a number of thematic research and education areas that are led by faculty on the campus, and ones that are highly integrative and interdisciplinary that all build on high-performance computing or advanced software or data services and so on. So basically building on advanced cyber infrastructure that NCSA is really very strong at. So with that sort of overall introduction, let me introduce Professor Xiaowen Wang, who will then introduce the speaker. That's what you get when you have a double header like this. So, okay.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much, Ed. Thanks for coming out on Friday morning. It's my great pleasure and honor to introduce today's speaker, Dr. and Professor David Tarbolton, who many of you, I think, here knew about his work or personally know him. I recognize some faces familiar to me. David received his PhD from MIT in civil engineering, focusing on hydrology and water resources. I think his PhD year was 1989, and since then he has a long, distinguished career. His research has focused on advancing the capability of hydrological modeling by taking advantage of new information and also process understanding enabled by digital technologies. His work has produced a number of software and tools, which are the kind of gadgets this group of people like generally. And these tools are widely used by related communities. One example would be TAODIM. I think Dave would touch upon in his lecture today. As a personal note, I got to know Dave several years ago at a NSF PI meeting. For many of us, we generally acknowledge, NSF supported our work producing these publications, products. But I think what NSF does for these meetings, PI meetings, are really valuable. And since then, we hanging out and developing ideas and collaborations. It's really fun, but what amazed me greatly by interacting with Dave is his intellectual power of bringing hydrology and the GIS together in his research. And in fact, he's regularly teaching hydrology and the GIS in water resources. And I very much look forward to David's lecture today, and he's going to be talking about HydroShare. He's the PI. There's no better person than him to talk about this thing, which is largely a community-driven effort. Without further ado, let's thank Dave. And the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. So appreciate that introduction. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm really excited to tell you about HydroShare, which is the system that we're developing. It's a collaboration across those 10 institutions there with a lot of people involved to develop a system for sharing hydrologic data, sharing hydrologic models, enabling them to be run on grid and cloud resources, and really hoping to advance the way that we do science in hydrology through this additional collaboration. So Xiaowen asked me to talk a bit about my broad research areas at the beginning. So I work in the area of hydrologic information systems, and HydroShare is part of that. I also work in digital elevation model terrain analysis, and that was the work with TAODIM that Xiaowen mentioned. And I'll talk a little bit about that at the beginning because there's interesting connections to be made between Cyber GIS, which is implementing some TAODIM functionality, and it's part of the broad effort to effectively establish software as a service, and HydroShare is going to support that. I've worked in the area of hydrology and geomorphology, where there's a nice synergy that's involved. And I know there's some prominent geomorphologists here at University of Illinois. Maybe they didn't. Not all of, some of them are here. But really, the landscape is sculpted by flowing water, and then that landscape then directs the way water flows. So that synergy is an interesting sort of process to try and understand. I've also worked in distributed hydrologic modeling, where we deal with snowmelt hydrology. So there I was in the field once, and somebody took this picture of me fiddling with an instrument in the snow, and worked in sort of non-parametric stochastic hydrology, looking at stream flow regimes for stream ecology in the Great Salt Lake. So today I'll be focusing primarily on hydrologic information systems with a bit of an excursion into terrain analysis. So I'll talk about hydrologic data and some of the computational challenges involved. The hydrologic terrain analysis, which will connect sort of going from TAUDEM, which is a software that I've developed, into CyberGIS. Then I'll talk about Kohazi and the hydrologic information system. And Alvalotti is the president of the board of Kohazi right now. So next year. So still a few months before you take over. So University of Illinois is well connected with Kohazi, and one of the prominent things with Kohazi is the hydrologic information system, and HydroShare is really built on that work. So I'll actually give you a bit of a demo of what HIS can do, and then how we're trying to extend that with HydroShare into the collaborative data analysis and publication arena, and some of the approach we're taking and functionality sort of to be developed. It's a work in progress, so there's going to be a lot of promises that hopefully we'll be able to fulfill by the end of the project. So one of the challenges that we have with hydrologic data is it comes from diverse sources. You have a lot of it collected by federal agencies, people like the USGS, the EPA, NASA. Sometimes it's collected for diverse purposes. Then you add to that university data collectors, and you've got a lot of heterogeneity in format, source, quality, and how we're going to effectively sort that out and bring it together. And I think one of the reasons to focus on that is I think the days are gone where you can really make scientific breakthroughs by just analyzing a single data set. At least in hydrology, we need to bring information together from multiple resources at a single place to advance our understanding. So when we started out the Kohazi Hydrologic Information System project, we did a survey, and one of the questions was, what proportion of your research time do you spend on preparing or pre-processing data into the forms needed for research? And it was a lot. Some people are answering 25 to 50%. There's a smaller fraction of people who are saying more than half their time they're spending on just preparing data. It shouldn't be that much. We actually want people to be spending more time on doing the work, thinking about the science of it. So we've got to do a better job of access to and working with data. I think there's also a bit of a digital divide, and it's with trepidation that I show this slide here at NCSA, because I know that this is the home of some of the most powerful supercomputers, but they're hard to use. Even if you can get the accounts on them and the access to them, you sometimes have to deal with the sort of arcaneness of job control languages. And if you ask people sort of out in practice, do you have access to or the know-how to really take advantage of advanced computing capability? Oftentimes the answer is no, and that's a challenge that we have to address. And that partly is addressed by sort of gateways, web interfaces, eventually software services. So one example of that might be TAUDEM. So this is software for deriving hydrologically useful information from digital elevation models. It starts from a representation of the topography as squares on a grid, so elevation values on a checkerboard, if you will. And That's a fairly simple, naive data structure. But from that, we can go through the process of cleaning up the data so that it's hydrologically adjusted. We don't have sort of internally draining pits that are not really there where the flow would dead end. You can then calculate the flow field, assign a flow direction for each grid cell. And once you've got the flow direction for each grid cell, you can then derive a whole lot of hydrologically relevant information, such as where the stuff that's carried by water flowing down the terrain would go, where it originates, the stream network, the watersheds, the relationships between those that can then support models such as distributed models that say how you go from rainfall to floods. And one of the things that's interesting to look at is how to do sort of flood prediction and what's the geographic fabric of data that we have across the nation to support where the water flows and help us manage it. So we're faced in dealing with that with the challenge of increasing digital elevation model resolution. We started out in the 1980s where you had fairly small file sizes to cover a decent sized watershed and coarse resolution. And as we've gone through to nowadays when you can get LiDAR at 1 square meter or even better, you have file sizes become challenging for people to work with if they're not working in high performance computing. So that requires developing algorithms that do the work we've done in parallel. So one of the grants I had was effectively to take the terrain analysis software, develop parallel approaches to it where we effectively partition the domain, refactor the algorithm so that they can work across that partition domain. So I'm not going to sort of talk through this pseudocode here, but the basic idea is that we do the removal of the pit filling on each of these partitions and then sort of communicate across the bounds and then iterate. So working with things in parallel. And then can we deliver that functionality, GIS functionality in general and say TAUDEM specifically as a service over the web so that people don't have to deal with configuring the computer to work in parallel. So we might think of broadly data sources, the functions and tools that are supported by some server, and you've got software as a service that users are accessing. So through collaborating a bit with Xiaowen, TAUDEM is now an app inside of CyberGIS. So you can select the national elevation data set. So the whole data set is stored on one of the servers, probably somewhere in this building. And you can then zoom in on the watershed that you want. Using TAUDEM is actually fairly challenging, so we've configured an interface that allows you to specify what it is you want at the end. So it's a sort of product-oriented design. You say you want this and you want that, and the wizard sort of configures the sequence of functions that you have to run to get the results. Then you submit the job. It progresses through the system, so you get analysis submitted, running, results are ready, and eventually, once the results are ready, then you can visualize them through a web mapping interface. So the results are displayed in the browser. So so that's the approach towards effectively doing some of the analysis on the web. Now I left out some of the sort of nitty details here that are sort of challenging, and we were sort of discussing through them yesterday. But where does the data get stored? How do you share it with someone? If you can then perhaps put it in a system like HydroShare that I'll be mentioning, that becomes a way to collaborate with it. There's issues of the projections of the data and making the user interface actually quite easy to use. I think there's still some challenges here that I sort of glossed over in going through the slides. So now I've mentioned Kuhazi, and I wanted to just introduce it because the Hydrologic Information System was sort of started all of this. Kuhazi is a 100 or so universities, the membership numbers have probably changed a little bit since then, spread across the US that really got together to try and establish research support services, have the community come together and do big science, if you will, by working together. There's also some affiliate and international members. And Al is the to-be chairman of the board starting in January. One of the projects of Quasi was the Hydrologic Information System, really an internet-based system to try and support the sharing of hydrologic data, comprised of databases, servers, and software, enhancing access to hydrologic data. And Praveen Kumar was involved in a lot of the early work with that. This was a project led by David Maidment that I was part of, and it ended up producing really three parts of it: the desktop client that serves as access to the data, servers that publish the data, and then a catalog that supports discovery. So before we had something like HIS, I spoke about the challenge of accessing data. You needed to sort of know where the data was and become a bit of an expert in the different formats. So you needed to be able to access, say, streamflow data from the USGS, NASA MODIS data from NASA, EPA data, and this is why people were spending so much time if they really wanted to integrate information together. So the vision that was realized with Quasi-HIS was effectively to establish a generic request for getting data from multiple sources and to have that be able to work from within the software that you're doing the analysis, get the browser out of the way, if you will. So the architecture at a high level for how that worked was we had these three parts: servers that publish data, the desktop that retrieves data, and the catalog that supports search. This organization is actually very similar or modeled after the way the internet works. So I'm sitting here or standing here, and Mosaic was the sort of first popular browser that came from here. So you could think of Hydro Desktop as a client, just like Mosaic was, and nowadays we use Firefox or Chrome or Internet Explorer. Data is spread across many servers, so it's a sort of distributed publication model. Anybody can establish a server, and that's analogous to web servers. But then to support discovery, you need some sort of cataloging capability. With the internet, we have Google and Bing and all of the search services that harvest and catalog. With the hydrologic data published as hydro servers, Quasi is maintaining a centralized catalog service that supports data discovery that you can search over based on the ontology that's been carefully organized to support that. And it all works because of effectively a reliance on standards for the exchange of information. WaterML is an XML-based markup language that Quasi developed, and then there's other Open Geospatial Consortium and other standards that are used. So this gives you a bit of an illustration of WaterML, and you can see it's really just an XML time series representation and a set of query functions that are supported and return that data. One of the nice things about XML is that the team working together was able to advance it through the somewhat bureaucratic Open Geospatial Consortium process and get it established as a standard. So now this is the screenshot of the sort of beginning of the document that encodes a standard for the representation of hydrologic observations. So that's one of the sort of gratifying outcomes of that project, and now it sits alongside things like KML, which is popular in Google and Google Earth, and NetCDF, which is very popular in the climate community, as well as many other standards. I guess sometimes people say the problem with standards is there are so many. But, so what I thought is, rather than talking you through, I'd throw myself to the challenge of giving a live demo. So I'm going to show you how HydroDesktop works. Now, it's a modest demo. compared to the sort of big computing, but we'll see how it goes. So I've actually got HydroDesktop open. If things crash, I can go and look at what is there already. But I'll open a new instance. So HydroDesktop is the software client that was developed using open source GIS components as part of the quasi-HIS project. I'll just open a map for North America. It's geo-aware, so because this computer is connected to the internet in Illinois, it centers on Illinois. I actually like to see the base map displayed without any transparency to it. You can go and see the sort of help links about it. I'm actually going to pan over here to Utah, where I know that there's some data that makes the demo somewhat compelling. So there we can see the Bear River draining to the Great Salt Lake. And if I zoom in, we'll see the resolution increase. So this is relying heavily on the sort of service-oriented architecture that I exposed. And this map is an Esri hydrology base map. So it's a web service. It's not provided as part of the software. That's Logan, where I'm from. And I need to zoom in far enough that I can actually see the Logan River coming out of this canyon in sufficient detail to be able to click on it and have the watershed delineation service work. So this little button here is going to access an EPA watershed delineation service. So we had the map from Esri. We're going to be using an EPA watershed delineation service, and I click on the stream, and now it's going off. Behind this web service, the EPA has the National Hydrography Data Set, which is a representation of all of the streams across the country and their connectivity. This stream is connected to that one downstream, and the watershed draining to that stream. And this web service is tracing up based on that connectivity, merging together the areas of the watersheds, and it'll return for me the stream network and the polygon surrounding that stream network. And I'm doing that because hypothetically I'm interested in what's going on in this watershed. Could I perhaps predict flooding, and can I perhaps relate snowmelt to the stream flow? So now it's returned that. I can zoom back to the full extent of that watershed, and we see there it is next to Bear Lake, Logan, which is where Utah State is right here. So let's see what data exists in the quasi-hydrologic information system in this watershed. So I switch to the search tab, and I select this as the feature, the area that I want to search. There's the opportunity to search based on keyword. I'm going to be interested in all the data, so I happen to know that there's a keyword all that will sort of cover everything. Otherwise, I could go for algal growth potential data, which probably I wouldn't find very much, or put in various terms and do a sort of keyword-based search. I can also specify the period that I want, and I'm going to, it defaults to 5 years. I'm going to go for the last, say, 15 years of data. I can select the data sources. If I don't do anything there, I just get all of them, and then I can do search. So now what's happening is it's accessing web services that are at what we call HIS Central. That's the quasi-cloud instance that's now run out of the Boston quasi office, and it's implemented in the Azure cloud. It's searching that catalog and returning all of the sites with data in this watershed. So you can see it found a whole bunch, and I can go and hover over each of them and see, oh, there's data about snow that comes from the Natural Resources Conservation Service. There's data from NASA that comes from their Global Land Data Assimilation System. There's a raindrop here that's Utah State University collected data. This triangle here is USGS data. So we're integrating information from multiple sources. I'm going to actually zoom in down here at the outlet and try and get some stream flow data. So if I do that, I'm going to get daily values rather than hourly, and just download that data. So you can see this is actually coming from San Diego Supercomputer Center. So they were the ones who effectively established this web service that interacts with data from the USGS. The USGS is now working on establishing web services effectively after this project showed the way. So we've downloaded that streamflow data. I can now switch into a graph tab and see this is the data I downloaded and visualize it. And this is the sort of typical pattern that the hydrologists in the audience will be familiar with that shows streamflow. Maybe streamflow is related to snow. So what can I find in terms of the snow? So go back to the map, and let's go to this snow telemetry site. And if I download whatever data is there, so SNOTEL is a system that's run by the NRCS that has pillows spread across the western US that as the snow builds up on them, the weight is measured as pressure in antifreeze, and that pressure is measured and translated into snow water equivalent, the amount of water you would get if you melted the snowpack. This service is actually supported by the World Water Program at Brigham Young University. And so we got all of that data. So let's close that and switch back to our graph. And now I could say put discharge and snow water equivalent on the same graph. So here I'm combining data from different sources, and we see the time series, and we say, oh, well, this year there was a large snowpack, a relatively high stream flow. This year, an even larger snowpack, the sort of highest stream flow in this record. So you might say visually there's a bit of a correlation there. You may want to sort of investigate that a little bit further. At some point you reach the limitations of what you can do with a sort of custom system like this. So and Hydro Desktop just effectively provides a relatively modest time series plotting capability. You want to break out and do some analysis in your favorite analysis environment. And my favorite analysis environment happens to be R. Maybe some of you share it, or maybe you prefer MATLAB or something like that. Anyway, we have built a plugin for Hydro Desktop that interacts with R. So I can switch into R and say, firstly, I have to start up the R console, and it's going to load some libraries. And then I can leave the two variables selected that I want to work with and just say generate R code. And it generates the queries to get the data out of the database that's held locally into the R environment where I can work with. Now I'm just going to change these variable names a little bit from the generic ones. I know that the first series I had was streamflow, so I'm going to change that to Q. The second series I had was snow, so I'm going to change that to S. And I'm going to send all of that code to R. So now it's executed those queries and it's built it in. And I can do something like just say plot the snow data values, the local date time on the x-axis of an R plot, and the snow data values, the actual data value on the y-axis. I'm going to use a line plot. So this is a little bit of sort of, you need to know R to be able to do this. Then it opens a little R window with a plot. So now I've really got the full power of R to analyze all this data. You probably don't want to see me typing a whole bunch of R commands. So I've got a little script that I can open. So I can open a script that is this demo. And if you scroll through here, you'll see that there's commands for going and replacing some of the missing values in the data, producing plots of stream flow as well as the snow. And then there's a sequencing across the years. I should probably change this to 1990 because I started it from there. And it's going to pick out the maximum value of snow, the maximum value of stream flow, and plot the two of them together. And then it's going to use the least squares fitting that R gives you for doing a simple regression, put the line on the plot, and then look at all the regression diagnostics. So if I select all of those commands that I want to execute and just say send that selection, off it goes. And here I've got a plot of maximum stream flow versus maximum slow, so you can sort of establish that relationship. And if you scroll up here in the console, you can see the standard regression statistics that you might use to diagnose that. So fairly simple sort of example, but I didn't use a browser there. I just worked with data from multiple sources and did an analysis that was in this environment. So thankfully it all worked. So there's a couple of slides here that go through what I just did. So download and plot the data. What you end up with is at your fingertips the full analysis capability of R. Data from multiple sources, accessed from distributed cloud resources. And this sort of highlights the importance of interoperability, the way that you can have one software system interact with another software system to actually achieve your answers. You're not going to have one system that does it all. So what we ended up with quasi-HIS was a window into water observations that's beyond what's existed before, through storage in a community data model, publication from a server, data access through internet-based services, tools that can support that, discovery through the thematic and geographic search, and then integrated modeling and analysis combining from multiple sources. So, but is there more? Hopefully there is more. This is actually quite hard. Publishing data using quasi-HIS requires access to or setting up a Hydro server, which can be a barrier. Accessing data actually requires Hydro Desktop, which is currently only PC-based. So that's a bit of a limitation. And it's generally limited to time series at a point. So with HydroShare, we want to enable more rapid advances in understanding by effectively moving to a web-based system, having a broader class of data types. And by being a web-based system that people can just upload data to, you avoid having to establish the Hydro server if that's a limitation for you. So it'll be a community collaboration website, how am I doing on time, that enables users to discover, access data, retrieve them to the desktop, and perform analyses in a distributed cloud environment. Our goal is really to sort of lower the barriers. Can we make sharing of hydrologic data as easy as it is to post a video on YouTube? It used to be that when I wanted to send pictures of my children or videos of my children to my mother in South Africa, it was hard because she was not very computer savvy. I could take the camcorder recording, but then there's the file, it's big, you got to get it across the internet. She was behind dial-up, or you had to put it on a tape and mail it. With YouTube, you can just make it happen easily. But I would submit that a lot of times with data, we are still in the old way of sharing data on sort of thumb drives. This column is that. The units are such and such. Oh, I've forgotten how I did this. it gets hard and we need to do better. So the use case that we want to address is really collaborative data analysis and publication, where you start from observers and instruments, data goes into HydroServer, and then it can get discovered, analyzed in the desktop. That I effectively demonstrated with the Hydro desktop analysis. But what about going to the next step? Now you want to share your results. Can you push them back into the system? So this is where HydroShare as a resource store comes in. Enable access to your collaborators, your group, so that you work together preparing a paper. The data gets massaged around as you do your analysis. Once the paper is prepared, you submit it for review. You capture the workflow that was used to generate the results. You submit it to a curating authority, in this case the Quasi-Water Data Center, but I've been learning about the National Data Service that's being proposed here, so that could certainly be an option. And it becomes made immutable and available to everybody. So that's the one thing we're trying to do with hydrologic data. The other thing is enable collaborative integrated modeling. So we think of models as objects that you would want to share just as much as data, and we want to provide links to some of the essential terrestrial variable data that are needed for hydrologic models, tools to remove the burden of preparing model inputs, and CyberGIS and TAUDEM have roles to play here, pre-configured models that you can just run, and then standards for information exchange and interoperability, and then tools for visualization and analysis. So we actually have the capability to share complete SWOT models for the hydrologists in the room who know what SWOT is. So we're taking a sort of general interpretation of data as more than just measurements, but all the sort of recorded factual material that you might use to validate your research finding that includes models, code, scripts, simulation results. And we need to accommodate many types of data. So we have a resource repository-centric paradigm where, so resources is the term we use for models, data, anything somebody wants to share. And we want then the models to sort of interact with information in the resource store. So a modeler could, for example, just focus on the model and take advantage of standard visualization capability, standard analysis tools. An analyst could work on their specific analysis and take advantage of standard models. So you enable people to focus on what their area is and take advantage of best practice tools in the other areas. So we've thought quite a lot about how to structure the resources, and the content in HydroShare is being saved in this Open Archives Initiative Object Reuse Exchange format. Bagot gives us a sort of container for putting the data in zip files with a manifest that gives you information. Then when you sort of drill down, you see the resource level metadata and the actual data contents. So that's the organizing structure that we're imposing. All content needs to get stored by that, recognizing that the way information is represented can either enable or inhibit what you can do with it. So the types of data that we would like to support, so this is my to-do list, and unfortunately I've only got one of them checked off. So currently HydroShare can only support generic resources, but we are working on adding the value of time series, geographic data types, reference data types. It means we don't actually hold the data, we just hold a link and somebody else supports it, building on the interoperability idea. And there's a fairly long list there. To support a resource type actually means tools for working with it, uploading it, viewers, as well as deciding on what is the resource content data model, the data and the metadata content, the logical relationships, and the file formats. We're taking the approach that by holding information in a standard format, tools can be established to use it, and that'll help us advance the scientific capabilities. So this is a bit of an illustration of some of the data types: time series information, multidimensional space-time data. We want to have collections that can represent the entirety of river geometry, from detailed topographic information, say from LiDAR, to cross-sections to that may be represented in a plan, and lead to looking at the height of stream, or the depth of stream flow that may lead to sort of flood inundation. Thinking of models, so John Goodall is our sort of model metadata person, and we've been working on establishing a data content model for model packages that include the sort of bundled contents of the model components, the actual executable entity, that's the program itself, the input and the output, and trying to organize all of that. Once that's done, it's not that great of a leap, if you've got a model in a system like this, to know what computational resource is required to be able to run it, to submit that model to that computational resource, and just execute it and get the results. So SWOT-share actually enables that. So SWOT-share is part of HydroShare. It's the work of Venkatesh Marwadi at Purdue, and you can find all the SWOT models that people have submitted on a map, and then execute them. Working with Larry Band with RESIS, and I know Barbara Minska is collaborating in some of this work as well, to effectively go from the sort of complicated and disorganized data sets that are needed to go into RESIS typically, to structured workflows that rely on the sort of commonality of model preparation tools. So how is it architected? First, at a very sort of simple, high level, we are building everything so that web pages and a REST web service API can do everything. We want to have the ability to work with browsers as well as clients almost seamlessly and interchangeably. You can't ever achieve it completely. You can't ever do everything that you could do on a web page with web services, but we're working with that principle. So that's the sort of high-level approach. If you look at a little bit more detail of how things are structured, we are building on IRODS, the Integrated Rule-Oriented Data System, which started out at San Diego Supercomputer Center and now is really championed by the team at Renzi, who are our collaborators on this project. And that will be the home for the resource files, the science metadata in the resource data model, the user accounts. We want to make sure the accounts are held close to the data as a sort of a business rule for access control. IRODS will then provide the authentication, authorization infrastructure, and also discovery via Elasticsearch. One of the things that IRODS supports is microservices. So based on rules associated with the content in it, programs can get executed and search, and that'll harvest the metadata into this Elasticsearch function. Then we're building our interface with the sort of security of the data taken care of. We're building our interface on Django, which is a Python-based web application framework, and we're establishing the sort of tools, the web pages, the web services, and then a client. We're continuing the development of Hydro Desktop to interact with that. We're using Docker as a virtualization framework for doing some execution of models. And there's an opportunity with either the web services that we have interacting with Django or the native web services that IRODS has for connecting to other partners. And we really want to work with that. And I've been talking to Praveen about Seed and Barbara about the green infrastructure CSync work, and other people. There's a critical zone observatory SSI project and the CI water project I'm working with in Wyoming, as well as CyberGIS. So there's certainly opportunities for connections here. I showed you my work to-do list. Right now, HydroShare is fairly modest. You can actually go to the beta version, but all you can do is store generic resources. So you end up going to the resources page. You can create a new resource. You can see a listing of resources. You can filter based on keywords. You can then go down to the resource details, where each one has a permanent link. So we're using permanent links to sort of uniquely identify things. You could see the abstract. You could submit it for publication if you wanted to get a digital object identifier, but that's only going to be enabled once we sort of get finished, or once we get to beyond beta. You can control who you share it with. You can have commenting on it. So we want to sort of build some of the sort of social metadata about it. You can control whether it's public or not. So I've probably gone longer than I should have, maybe. But in summary, it's a new web-based system for advancing model and data sharing. Sharing features being added to Hydro Desktop. Access to more types of hydrologic data using standards and standards-compliant data formats. Enhancing the catalog functionality to broaden discovery. So going from the effectively very structured ontology-based search that Quasi-HIS had to the sort of more free-form keyword type of catalog in elastic search functionality in iRods, model sharing and discovery functionality, and then ease of access to high-performance computing. Once you've got the data in a system like this, it's not much of a leap to just submit it to a high-performance computing system and visualize the results through one of the tools that is linked to it. I think the collaboration supported by social media is something we want to not really develop new stuff, but just take advantage of what we are seeing in the sort of social media world, and then build on interoperability and links to other data and modeling systems. So there's a lot of people on the team, and they weren't all at this meeting, but those are the people who came to the meeting and got their faces in the picture. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Dave, for the illuminating, very interesting talk. And we do have quite a bit of time for questions, comments. And we have a lunch reception for folks who want to mingle with each other and mingle with Dave, corner him for more questions right after this. So if you are available, welcome to stay around. Raise your hand when you ask questions, speak as loud as you possibly can, and then I'll repeat your questions for recording. Yes?
So I want to know a bit more about the problems that HydroShare would solve. Are there grand problems that are still unsolved relating to hydrological data, or what is the user base going to be using this for?
So I think flood forecasting is one of them. There's, I guess I mentioned briefly the idea of the sort of flood interoperability experiment, but really bringing together information from rainfall forecasts, the information on the geographic configuration to be able to predict stream flow at a certain gauge in time to warn people. So that's a cyber infrastructure thing, and that's one of the things. I guess there's a lot of the way geomorphology and hydrology interact, the sort of landscape evolution problem. How can we? You can never from from measurements, quantify the subsurface properties or everything in sufficient detail, but how can we learn from sort of combining terrain analysis, geomorphology, critical zone information, if you will, what the state of the system is in great detail to be able to understand hydrologic processes. So those are probably two that I would mention.
So the question was about grand challenges HydroShare would be able to contribute to resolving.
I should have repeated that. I was warned to at the beginning, and I didn't.
More questions?
Go ahead.
Yes.
So when researchers collect data or create models, they have a certain intellectual property invested. So how are you going to incentivize people to then share using this platform?
Okay, so was that recorded there? So I guess there's sort of two aspects to that. Having researchers willing to release their information is a social problem and a social challenge, and then having the technology to enable it, and also in part making it beneficial to them. People may be willing to share the information, but it's just too hard. The one incentive I want HydroShare to provide is the tools that it allows you to do what you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. By putting your data in the system, you should really, it should become the place that you do your work. So it would be a network system. You have tools there, so you really do it for your own analysis. You then are probably collaborating, because few people work completely on their own these days. So you end up starting to share it with your colleagues, and they would be part of the system, and they would take advantage of the tools that are there and that you end up contributing. And then we have an obligation a lot of times with public funding to make our results public at the end, that sometimes people may do begrudgingly, but if it's really easy to just sort of say, check the box and say, publish this, then that duty and obligation becomes a lot easier. But the incentive is really what it will enable you to sort of do selfishly for your work.
Can I just make a suggestion? You could, through your interface, you could actually publicize what the data is that was used to generate any result or diagram, and then people would be able to cite that data, which may then provide the incentive for people to share.
Right, so certainly publishing data with digital object identifiers for the data is part of it, and that could be linked to the diagrams. I think there's a lot of work on this whole publishing of data along with papers that a lot of people are working on. And I have to recognize that HydroShare is a fairly sort of modest project, and I want to focus on what we can add of value to the hydrologists while this whole movement progresses.
Oh, you're going
I kept my microphone just handy for questions. So that was really interesting. The discussion about the national data services that we're spearheading here at Illinois, but with some partners, including San Diego, is about the same kinds of issues, but at a sort of a more global level. And I don't mean, so you're national and international, but I mean in terms of going across disciplines as well. And so one very specific piece that we're focusing on to get started with is was almost captured perfectly in one of your slides about the sort of the pipeline from data to actual publication, linking it with traditional publications that, when you have a journal article. And so that might be an area where we could very specifically overlap with you and potentially have your community act as a driver. And then the other area that I think we're focusing on is trying to bridge between these different either communities or other kinds of services that are doing similar kinds of things, but they're usually like just, one particular niche, but there's a whole global set of services that are needed. So we're thinking about how we might connect different communities. So while you may have a fairly large and obviously vibrant and growing community around the hydrology areas, there are other areas that might be extremely important as well, even in your own sort of domain that then they're not connected in. So we're trying to also bridge the gap between communities and so on.
I think that's really important, and I would sort of love to interact. And if we can be doing data publication and it's working with the National Data Service, that'd be great. One of the things that one of the ways that I approach this is from a model that's, I guess, sometimes used in a number of things, but basically of sort of building small steps and perhaps working software. So sometimes I've gone to these software carpentry workshops, and they say software design principles, and they sort of put a red line through it, and they say software design examples, and then they just sort of talk about building small. And we also learned that, I guess, working with David Maidment in the Quasi-HIS project, he just said, okay, let's start building web services. Rather than getting everybody to agree on the sort of grand thing, can we start some examples, put together a web service for the USGS streamflow, then bring along others. So I guess maybe in that spirit, I would like to sort of help make progress in the hydrology area in this big sort of data publication thing by providing one example of how we think it might work. And it probably will be different from how other people do it in other disciplines, and we can sort of learn by comparing notes. But I'd like to actually just sort of do it rather than get bogged down in too many committees. So I don't know whether that's at least that's my philosophy. I mean, committees can, but not to say that I don't know whether the National Data Service has got lots of committees or not.
We have no committees.
You don't have any committees.
We're trying to do stuff. So
you also just try to, I think, and we also found ourselves getting pushed by things like Figshare, where I can actually go and post a figure or post a data set in Figshare, and I can have a digital object identifier within about 10 minutes. Now, some people say, well, maybe the quality control of that is a little bit lacking, and there's not sufficient vetting of metadata, and on and on and on. But the truth of it is, if I want a digital object identifier for my data, I can do that. The genie's out of the bottle. So the bar has to be quite low, because else people are going to go elsewhere.
Time for one more question, preferably from back of the room. That's not serious. Yeah, one more question. Time for maybe one more question before we bring up for the reception. Sure. Oops, sorry.
I saw a brief look at what other data areas you can do correlations with alkalinity and things like that. I didn't see how far that stretched. Is it? Are there data sets that you can use to correlate with? You used rainfall as an example and water flows. Do you do work with pollution and data for agricultural runoff or harvest yields, or is there data available with that you tie in with this?
So there is some of that. So right now it's somewhat of a voluntary contribution system. So the Quasi-HIS, which is where that list of terms that are searchable come from, is this network of hydro servers. So you can establish the software and put the data in it and register it with the HIS catalog, and it becomes accessible. So there's probably about 20 or 30 universities around the country that have hydro servers, and there's a sort of a variety of data in there. Then there's also some of which will be that. I know some of the critical zone observatories and water sustainability climate observatories are starting to use that, so they'll have some of that data in it. There are also, we've sort of tried to work with agencies like EPA, so there's a STORET service, so you can get some of that EPA data through the system. So I guess the NRCS snowtail data, I don't know if the NRCS has any other data that might be the sort that you are asking about, but I think it's only the snowtail data that we have in there.
Well, please join me to thank Dave one more time again for the very informative sharing, and as a small token of appreciation.
Well, thank you. That looks wonderful. So great.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, thanks. As you heard from Ed, NCSA Colloquium is going to be regularly scheduled. Stay tuned. There will be flyers and also information for the campus communities and beyond gets distributed. And the CyberGS Distinguished Speaker Series is supposed to be a bi-monthly scheduled event. In fact, Dave is the first speaker of this 14 to 15 academic season. So with that, we'll wrap up today's seminar, and hope you enjoy the rest of the day and the rest of the semester and kick off your holiday season. Thank you, and the lunch reception is outside.